guys. Good evening. I still don't know how to start these, but I realized that I didn't do an intro yesterday for the last one. So, good evening, everybody. My name is Lyra. I have decided to start reading either young reader books, young adult books, everything in between. Things that are easy to listen to, mindless to listen to, things you may have read as a kid. So, pardon me. And this isn't like a perfect audiobook, obviously. I'm doing this live. But I just wanted to do something that I enjoy and share it with others. So, we're going to jump back into Erin Hunter's Into the Wild book. So, we left off on chapter 3. That morning, as Rusty slept off his night's wanderings, the mouse dream came again, even more vivid than before. Free of his collar, beneath the moon, he stalked the timid creature, but this time he was aware of being watched. Shining from the shadows of the forest, he saw dozens of yellow eyes. The clan cats had entered his dream world. Rusty woke, blinking in the bright sunshine that was streaming across the kitchen floor. His fur felt heavy and thick with warmth. His food bowl had been topped up, and his water bowl rinsed out and filled with bitter-tasting two-leg water. Rusty preferred drinking from puddles outside, but when it was hot, or he was very thirsty, he had to admit it was easier to lap up the water indoors. Could he really abandon this comfortable life? He ate, then pushed his way out the cat flap into the garden. The day promised to be warm, and the garden was heavy with the smell of early blossoms. "Hello, Rusty," mewed a voice from the fence. It was Smudge. "You should have been awake an hour ago. The baby sparrows were out stretching their wings." "Did you catch any?" Rusty asked. Smudge yawned and licked his nose. "Couldn't be bothered. I'd already eaten enough at home. Anyway, why weren't you out earlier? Yesterday you were complaining about Henry sleeping his time away, and today you're not much better yourself." Rusty sat down on the cool earth beside the fence and curled his tail neatly over his front paws. "I was in the woods last night," he reminded his friend. At once he felt the blood stir in his veins and his fur stiffen. Smudge looked down at him, his eyes wide. "Oh, yes, I forgot. How was it? Did you catch anything? Or did anything catch you?" Rusty paused, not sure how to tell his old friend what had happened. "I met some wildcats," he began. "What?" Smudge was clearly shocked. "Did you get into a fight?" "Sort of." Rusty could feel the energy surging through his body again as he recalled the strength and power of the clan cats. "Were you hurt? What happened?" Smudge prompted him eagerly. "There were 3 of them, bigger and stronger than any of us." "And you fought all 3 of them?" Smudge interrupted, his tail twitching with excitement. "No," Rusty mewed hastily. "Just the youngest one. The other 2 came later." "How come they didn't shred you to pieces?" "They just warned me to leave their territory, but then..." Rusty hesitated. "What?" mewed Smudge impatiently. "They asked me to join their clan?" Smudge's whiskers quivered disbelievingly. They did," Rusty insisted. "Why would they do that?" "I don't know," Rusty admitted. "I think they need extra paws in their clan." "Sounds a bit odd to me," Smudge mewed doubtfully. "I wouldn't trust them if I were you." Rusty looked at Smudge. His black and white friend had never shown any interest in venturing into the woods. He was perfectly content living with his housefolk. He would never understand the restless longing that Rusty's dreams stirred in him night after night. But I do trust them, Rusty purred softly. And I've made up my mind. I'm going to join them. Smudge scrambled down from the fence and stood in front of Rusty. Please don't go, Rusty, he mewed in alarm. I might never see you again. Rusty nudged him affectionately with his head. Don't worry, my housefolk will get another cat. You'll get on with him fine. You get along with everyone. But it won't be the same, Smudge wailed. Rusty twitched his tail impatiently. That's just the point. If I stay around here till they take me to the cutter, I won't be the same either. Smudge looked puzzled. The cutter, he echoed. The vet, Rusty explained. To be altered, like Henry was. Smudge shrugged and stared down at his paws. But Henry's all right, he mumbled. I mean, I know he's a bit lazier now, but he's not unhappy. We could still have fun. Rusty felt his heart fill with sadness at the thought of leaving his friend. I'm sorry, Smudge. I'll miss you, but I have to go. Smudge didn't reply, but stepped forward and gently touched Rusty's nose with his own. Fair enough. I can see I can't stop you. But at least let's spend one more morning together. Rusty found himself enjoying the morning even more than usual, visiting his old haunts with Smudge, sharing words with the cats he had grown up with. Every one of his senses felt supercharged, as if he were poised before a huge jump. As Sunhigh approached, Rusty grew more and more impatient to see if Lionheart would really be waiting for him. The idle buzz of meows from his old friends seemed to fade into the background as all his senses strained towards the wood. Rusty jumped down from his garden fence for the last time and crept into the woods. He had said his goodbyes to Smudge. Now all his thoughts were focused on the forest and the cats who lived in it. As he approached the spot where he had met with the clan cats the night before, he sat down and tasted the air. Tall trees shielded the ground from the midday sunshine, making it comfortably cool. Here and there, a patch of sunlight shone through a gap in the leaves and lit up the forest floor. Rusty could smell the same cat scent as last night, but he had no idea whether it was old or new. He lifted his head and sniffed uncertainly. You have a lot to learn, meowed a deep voice. Even the tiniest clan kitten knows when another cat's nearby. Rusty saw a pair of green eyes glinting from beneath a bramble bush. Now he recognized the scent. It was Lionheart. Can you tell if I'm alone? Asked the golden tabby, stepping into the light. Hastily, Rusty sniffed again. The scents of Blue Star and Grey Paw were still here, but not as strong as the previous night. Hesitantly, he mewed. Blue Star and Grey Paw aren't with you this time. That's right, meowed Lionheart, but someone else is. Rusty stiffened as a second clan cat strode into the clearing. This is Whitestorm, purred Lionheart, one of the Thunder Clan's senior warriors. Rusty looked at the Tom and felt his spine tingle with cold fear. Was this a trap? Long-bodied and muscular, Whitestorm stood in front of Rusty and gazed down at him. His white coat was thick and unmarked, and his eyes were the yellow of sun-baked sand. Rusty flattened his ears warily and tensed his muscles in preparation for a fight. Relax, before your fear scent brings unwanted attention, growled Lionheart. We are here only to take you to our camp. Rusty sat very still, hardly daring to breathe, as Whitestorm stretched his nose forward and gave him a curious sniff. Hello, young one, murmured the white cat. I've heard a lot about you. Rusty dipped his head in greeting. Come, we can speak more once we are in the camp, ordered Lionheart, and without pausing, he and Whitestorm leapt away into the undergrowth. Rusty jumped to his paws and followed as quickly as he could. The two warriors made no allowances for Rusty as they sped through the forest, and before long he was struggling to keep up. Their pace barely slowed as they led him over fallen trees that they cleared in a single leap, but which Rusty had to scramble over paw by paw. They passed through sharply fragrant pine trees, where they had to jump across deep gullies churned up by the two-legged tree-eater. From the safety of his garden fence, Rusty had often heard it roaring and snarling in the distance. One gully was too wide to jump, half filled with slimy foul-smelling water. The clan cats waded through without hesitation. Rusty had never put a paw in water before, but he was determined not to show any signs of weakness, so he narrowed his eyes and followed, trying to ignore the uncomfortable wetness that soaked his belly fur. At last, Lionheart and Whitestorm paused. Rusty skidded to a halt behind them and stood panting, while the two warriors stepped onto a rock that rested on the edge of a small ravine. "We are very close to our camp now," meowed Lionheart. Rusty strained to see any signs of life, moving leaves, a glimpse of fur among the bushes below, but his eyes saw nothing except the same undergrowth that covered the rest of the forest floor. "Use your nose. You must be able to scent it," hissed Whitestorm impatiently. Rusty closed his eyes and sniffed. Whitestorm was right. The scents here were very different from the cat scent he was used to. The air smelled stronger, speaking of many, many different cats. He nodded thoughtfully and announced, "I can smell cats." Lionheart and Whitestorm exchanged amused looks. "There will come a time, if you are accepted into the clan, when you will know each cat scent by name." Lionheart meowed. "Follow me." He led the way nimbly down the boulders to the bottom of the ravine and pushed his way through a thick patch of gorse. Rusty followed and Whitestorm took up the rear. As his sides scraped against the prickly gorse, Rusty looked down and noticed that the grass beneath his paws was flattened into a broad, strong-smelling track. This must be the main entrance into the camp, he thought. Beyond the gorse, a clearing opened up. The ground at the center was bare, hard earth shaped by many generations of paw steps. This camp had been here a long time. The clearing was dappled by sunshine, and the air felt warm and still. Rusty looked around, his eyes wide. There were cats everywhere, sitting alone or in groups, sharing food or purring quietly as they groomed one another. Just after sun-high, when the day is hottest, is a time for sharing tongues, Lionheart explained. "Sharing tongues?" Rusty echoed. "Clan cats always spend time grooming each other and sharing the news of the day," Whitestorm told him. "We call it sharing tongues. It is a custom that binds the members of the clan together." The cats had obviously smelled Rusty's foreign scent, for heads began to turn and stare curiously in his direction. Suddenly shy of meeting any cat's gaze directly, Rusty looked around the clearing. It was edged with thick grass, dotted with tree stumps and fallen trees. A thick curtain of ferns and gorse shielded the camp from the rest of the woods. "Over there," meowed Lionheart, flicking his tail toward an impenetrable-looking tangle of brambles, "is the nursery, where the kits are cared for." Rusty swiveled his ears towards the bushes. He couldn't see through the knot of prickly branches, but he could hear the mewling of several kittens from somewhere inside. As he watched, a ginger she-cat squirmed out through a small gap in the front. That must be one of the queens, Rusty thought. A tabby queen with distinctive black markings appeared around the bramble bush. The two she-cats exchanged a friendly lick between the ears before the tabby slipped inside the nursery, murmuring to the squealing kits. "The care of our kits is shared by all the queens," meowed Lionheart. "All cats serve the clan. Loyalty to the clan is the first law in our warrior code. Lesson you must learn quickly if you wish to stay with us." "Here comes Blue Star," meowed Whitestorm, sniffing the air. Rusty sniffed the air too, and was pleased that he was able to recognize the scent of the gray she-cat a moment before she appeared from the shadow of a large boulder that lay beside them at the head of the clearing. "He came," Blue Star purred, addressing the warriors. Whitestorm replied. Lionheart was convinced he would not. Rusty noticed the tip of Blue Star's tail twitch impatiently. "Well, what do you think of him?" she asked. "He kept up well on the return journey, despite his puny size," Whitestorm admitted. "He certainly seems strong for a kitty pet." "So it is agreed?" Blue Star looked at Lionheart and Whitestorm. Both cats nodded. Then I shall announce his arrival to the clan." Blue Star leapt up onto the boulder and yowled. "Let all those cats old enough to catch their own prey join here beneath the high rock for a clan meeting." Her clear call brought all the cats trotting towards her, emerging like liquid shadows from the edges of the clearing. Rusty stayed where he was, flanked by Lionheart and Whitestorm. The other cats settled themselves below the high rock and looked expectantly at their leader. Rusty felt a rush of relief as he recognized Grey Paw's thick gray fur among the cats. Beside him sat a young tortoiseshell queen, her black-tipped tail tucked neatly over small white paws. A large dark gray tabby crouched behind them, the black stripes on his fur looking like shadows on a moonlit forest floor. When the cats were still, Blue Star spoke. "ThunderClan needs more warriors," she began. "Never before have we had so few apprentices in training. It has been decided that ThunderClan will take in an outsider to train as a warrior." Rusty heard indignant murmurs erupt among the clan cats, but Blue Star silenced them with a firm yowl. "I have found a cat who is willing to become an apprentice of ThunderClan. Lucky to become an apprentice," caterwauled a loud voice above the ripple of shock that spread through the cats. Rusty craned his neck and saw a pale tabby cat standing up and glaring defiantly at their leader. Blue Star ignored the tabby and addressed all of her clan. "Lionheart and Whitestorm have met this young cat, and they agree with me that we should train him with the other apprentices." Rusty looked up at Lionheart, then back at the clan, to find all eyes were on him now. His fur prickled, and he swallowed nervously. There was silence for a moment. Rusty was sure they must all be able to hear his heart pulsing and smell his fear scent. Now a deafening crescendo of caterwaul rose from the crowd. "Where does he come from? Which clan does he belong to? What a strange scent he carries. That's not the scent of any clan I know." Then one yell in particular sounded out above the rest. "Look at his collar! He's a kitty pet!" It was the pale tabby again. "Once a kitty pet, always a kitty pet. This clan needs wild-born warriors to defend it, not another soft mouth to feed." Lionheart bent down and hissed into Rusty's ear. "That tabby's long tail. He smells your fear. They all do. You must prove to him and the other cats that your fear won't hold you back." But Rusty couldn't move. He couldn't even prove to these fierce cats that he wasn't just a kitty pet. Could he? The tabby continued to jeer at him. "Your collar is a mark of the 2 legs, and that noisy jingling will make you a poor hunter at best. At worst, it will bring the 2 legs into our territory, looking for the poor lost kitty pet who fills the woods with his pitiful tinkling." All the cats howled in agreement. Longtail went on, well aware that he had the support of his audience. "The noise of your treacherous bell will alert our enemies, even if your 2 legs stench doesn't." Lionheart hissed into Rusty's ear once more. "Do you back down from the challenge?" Rusty still did not move, but this time he was trying to pinpoint Longtail's position. There he was, just behind Dusty Brown Queen. Rusty flattened his ears, narrowed his eyes, and hissed, leapt through the startled cats to fling himself onto his tormentor. Longtail was completely unprepared for Rusty's attack. He staggered sideways, losing his footing on the hard-baked earth. Filled with rage and desperate to prove himself, Rusty dug his claws deep into the tabby cat's fur and sank in his teeth. No subtle rituals of swiping and boxing preceded this fight. The 2 cats were locked in a screaming, writhing tussle that flipped and somersaulted around the clearing at the heart of the camp. The other cats had to spring out of the way to avoid the screeching whirlwind of fur. As Rusty scratched and struggled, he was suddenly aware that he felt no fear, only exhilaration. Through the roaring of the blood in his ears, he could hear the cats around them wailing with excitement. Then Rusty felt his collar tighten around his neck. Longtail had gripped it between his teeth and was tugging hard. Rusty felt terrible pressure at his throat. Unable to breathe, he started to panic. He writhed and twisted, but each movement only made the pressure worse. Retching and gulping for air, he summoned up all his strength and tried to pull away from Longtail's grip, and suddenly, with a loud snap, he was free. Longtail tumbled away from him. Rusty scrambled to his paws and looked around. Longtail was crouching 3 tail lengths away, and dangling from Longtail's mouth, Rusty saw his collar, mangled and broken. At once, Blue Star leapt down from the high rock and silenced the noisy crowd with the thunderous caterwaul. Rusty and Longtail remained fixed to the spot, gasping for breath. Clumps of fur hung from their ruffled coats. Rusty could feel a cut stinging above his eye. Longtail's left ear was badly torn, and blood dripped down his lean shoulders onto the dusty ground. They stared at each other, their hostility not yet spent. Blue Star stepped forward and took the collar from Longtail. She placed it on the ground in front of her and meowed. The newcomer has lost his two-leg collar in a battle for his honor. StarClan has spoken its approval. This cat has been released from the hold of his two-leg owners and is free to join ThunderClan as an apprentice. Rusty looked at Blue Star and solemnly nodded his acceptance. He stood up and stepped forward into a shaft of sunshine, welcoming the warmth of his sore muscles. The pool of light blazed bright on his orange pelt, making his fur glow. Rusty lifted his head proudly and looked at the cats that surrounded him. This time no cat argued or jeered. He had shown himself to be worthy opponent in battle. Blue Star approached Rusty and placed the shredded collar on the ground in front of him. She touched his ear gently with her nose. You look like a brand of fire in the sunlight, she murmured. Her eyes flashed briefly, as if her words had more meaning for her than Rusty knew. You have fought well. Then she turned to the clan and announced, from this day forward, until he has earned his warrior name, this apprentice will be called Firepaw in honor of his flame-colored coat. She stepped back and with the other cats waited silently for his next move. Without hesitation, Rusty turned and kicked dust and grass over his collar as though burying his dirt. Longtail growled and limped out of the clearing towards a fern-shaded corner. The cats split into groups, murmuring to each other excitedly. Hey, Firepaw! Rusty heard Graypaw's friendly voice behind him. Firepaw! A thrill of pride surged through him at the sound of his new name. He turned to greet the gray apprentice with a welcoming sniff. Great fight, Firepaw, mewed Graypaw. Especially for a kitty pet. Longtail is a warrior, although he only finished his training 2 moons ago. That scar he left on his ear won't let him forget you in a hurry. You've spoiled his good looks, that's for sure. Thanks, Graypaw, Firepaw replied. He put up quite a fight, though. He licked his front paw and began to wipe clean the deep scratch that stung above his eye. As he washed, he heard his new name again, echoing among meows of the cats. Firepaw! Hey, Firepaw! Welcome, young Firepaw. Firepaw closed his eyes for a moment and let the voices wash over him. Good name, too, Graypaw mewed approvingly, jolting in the wake. Firepaw looked around. Where did Longtail creep off to? I think he was heading towards Spotted Leaf's den. Graypaw tipped his head toward the fern-enclosed corner where Longtail had disappeared into. She's our medicine cat. Not bad-looking either. Younger and a lot prettier than most. A low yowl next to the 2 cats stopped Graypaw mid-speech. They both turned, and Firepaw recognized the powerful gray tabby who had sat behind Graypaw earlier. Darkstripe mewed Graypaw, dipping his head respectfully. The sleek Tom looked at Firepaw for a moment. Lucky your collar snapped when it did. Longtail is a young warrior, but I can't imagine him being beaten by a kitty pet. He spat the word kitty pet scornfully, then turned and stalked off. Now, Darkstripe, Graypaw hissed to Firepaw under his breath, is neither young nor pretty. Firepaw was about to agree with his new friend when he was interrupted by a warning yell from an old gray cat sitting at the edge of the clearing. Small ear smells trouble, Graypaw meowed, immediately alert. Firepaw barely had time to look around before a young cat crashed through the bushes and into camp. He was skinny and apart from the white tip of his long thin tail, jet black from head to toe. Graypaw gasped. That's Ravenpaw. Why is he alone? Where's Tigerclaw? Firepaw looked at Ravenpaw staggering across the floor of the clearing. He was panting heavily. His coat was ruffled and dusty, and his eyes were wild with fear. Who are Ravenpaw and Tigerclaw? Firepaw whispered to Graypaw, as several other cats raced past him to greet the new arrival. Ravenpaw is an apprentice. Tigerclaw is his mentor. Graypaw explained quickly. Ravenpaw went out with Tigerclaw and Redtail at sunrise on a mission against RiverClan. The lucky furball. Redtail, Firepaw echoed, thoroughly confused by all these names. Blue Star's deputy, hissed Greypaw. But why on earth has Ravenpaw come back alone? He added to himself. He lifted his head to listen as Blue Star stepped forward. Ravenpaw? The she-cat spoke calmly, but a look of worry clouded her blue eyes. The other cats drew back, curling their lips with anxiety. What has happened? Blue Star jumped onto the high rock and looked down at the trembling cat. Speak, Ravenpaw. Ravenpaw was still struggling for breath, and his sighs heaved fitfully while the dust around him turned red with blood. But still he managed to scramble up onto the high rock and stand beside Blue Star. He turned to the crowd of eager faces that surrounded him and summoned enough breath to declare, Redtail is dead. Chapter 4. Shocked yowls rose from the clan cats and echoed through the forest. Ravenpaw staggered slightly. His right foreleg glistened, wet with blood that flowed from the deep gash on his shoulder. We met 5 River Clan warriors beside the stream, not far from the Sunning Rocks, he went on shakily. Oakheart was among them. Oakheart? Greypaw gasped beside Firepaw. He's the deputy of River Clan. He's one of the greatest warriors in the forest. Lucky Ravenpaw, wish it could have been me. I'd have really... Greypaw was silenced by a fierce glance from the old Grey Tom, who had first sensed Ravenpaw's return. Firepaw turned his attention back to Ravenpaw. Redtail warned Oakheart to keep his hunting parties out of ThunderClan territory. He said the next RiverClan warrior to be caught in ThunderClan territory would be killed, but Oakheart would not back down. He said his clan had to be fed. Whatever we threatened. Ravenpaw paused to wheeze for breath. His wound was still bleeding heavily, and he stood awkwardly to keep the weight off his shoulder. That's when RiverClan cats attacked. It was hard to see what was happening. The fighting was vicious. I saw Oakheart had Redtail pinned to the ground, but then Redtail... Suddenly Ravenpaw's eyes rolled in his head, and he lurched sideways. Half scrambling, half falling, he slithered off the high rock and collapsed on the ground below. A ginger queen bounded towards him and crouched at his side. She licked his cheek briefly and caught it out. Spotted Leaf! Out of the fern-shaded corner trotted the pretty torso shell Firepaw had noticed sitting beside Greypaw earlier. She hurried over to Ravenpaw and mewed for the queen to stand back. Then she used her small pink nose to roll the apprentice over so that she could take a good look at the wound. She glanced up and meowed. It's all right, Golden Flower. His wounds aren't fatal, but I'll need to fetch some cobwebs to stop the bleeding. As Spotted Leaf sprinted back to her den, the hushed silence in the clearing was broken by a mournful howl. All eyes turned to the direction it had come from. A massive dark brown tabby staggered through the gorse tunnel. Between his sharp teeth, the warrior held not prey, but the lifeless body of another cat. He dragged the tattered creature into the center of the clearing. Firepaw craned his neck and glimpsed a flash of bright ginger tail hanging limply in the dust. Shock rippled through the clan like a chill breeze. Beside Firepaw, Paw dropped into a crouch as grief swept over him. Redtail! How did this happen? Tiger Claw demanded Blue Star from her position on High Rock. Tiger Claw let the scruff of Redtail's neck fall from his mouth. He looked steadily back at Blue Star. He died with honor, struck down by Oakheart. I couldn't save him, but I managed to take Oakheart's life while he was still gloating over his victory. Tiger Claw's voice was strong and deep. Redtail's death was not in vain, for I doubt we'll see RiverClan hunters in our territory again. Firepaw glanced at Greypaw. The apprentice's eyes were dark with sadness. After a moment's pause, several of the cats moved forward to lick Redtail's bedraggled fur. As they groomed, they purred hushed phrases to the dead warrior. Firepaw whispered into Greypaw's ear. What are they doing? Greypaw didn't take his eyes off the dead cat as he replied. His spirit may have left to join StarClan, but the clan will share tongues with Redtail one last time. StarClan? Firepaw echoed. It's the tribe of heavenly warriors that watches over all clan cats. You can see them in Silverpelt. Firepaw looked confused, so Greypaw explained. Silverpelt is that thick band of stars you see each night stretching across the sky. Each star is a StarClan warrior. Redtail will be among them tonight. Firepaw nodded, and Greypaw stepped forward to share tongues with his dead deputy. Bluestar had remained silent while the first cats came to pay their respects to Redtail. Now she leapt down from the high rock and walked slowly towards Redtail's body. The other cats retreated and watched as their leader crouched down to share tongues with her old comrade one last time. When she had finished, she raised her head and spoke. Her voice was low and thick with grief, and the clan listened in silence. Redtail was a brave warrior. His loyalty to ThunderClan could never be doubted. I always relied on his judgment, for it bore witness to the needs of the clan, and was never swayed by the self-interest or pride. He would have made a fine leader. Then she lowered herself onto her belly, her head bowed, her paws stretched neatly before her, and silently she grieved for her lost friend. Several other cats came and lay down beside her, their bowed heads and hunched backs echoing her mournful pose. Firepaw watched. He had not known Redtail, but he couldn't help feeling moved as he witnessed the clan mourn. Greypaw came and stood beside him again. Dustpaw will be sad, he remarked. Dustpaw, Redtail's apprentice, that brown striped tabby over there. I wonder who his new mentor will be. Firepaw glanced over at the small Tom who squatted near Redtail's body, staring unseeing at the ground. Firepaw looked past him to the clan leader. How long will Bluestar sit with him? He asked. Probably the whole night, replied Greypaw. Redtail was her deputy for many, many moons. She won't want to let him go too quickly. He was one of the best warriors, not as big and powerful as Tigerclaw or Lionheart, but quick and clever. Firepaw looked at Tigerclaw, admiring the strength that swelled in his powerful muscles and broad head. His massive body showed signs of his warrior life. One of his ears was split into a deep V shape, and a thick scar sliced the bridge of his nose. Suddenly, Tigerclaw stood up and stalked over to Ravenpaw. Spotted Leaf was crouching beside Tigerclaw's wounded apprentice, using her teeth and front paws to press wads of cobweb onto his shoulder wound. Firepaw leaned towards Greypaw and asked, "What's Spotted Leaf doing?" Stopping the bleeding. It looked like a nasty cut. And Ravenpaw seemed really shaken up. He's always been a bit jumpy, but I've never seen him this bad before. Let's go and see if he's woken up yet. They made their way through the grieving cats toward the spot where Ravenpaw lay and settled themselves a respectful distance away to wait until Tigerclaw had finished speaking. So, Spotted Leaf, Tigerclaw addressed the tortoiseshell with a confident meow. How is he? Do you think you can save him? I've spent a lot of time training him up, and I don't want my efforts to be wasted at the first battle. Spotted Leaf didn't look up from her patient as she replied, Yes, a pity if, after all your valuable training, he dies in his first fight, eh? Firepaw could hear a teasing purr in her soft meow. Will he live? Tigerclaw demanded. Of course. He just needs to rest. Tigerclaw snorted and looked down at the motionless black shape. He jabbed Ravenpaw with one of his front claws. Come on, then. Get up. Ravenpaw didn't move. Look at the length of that claw. Firepaw hissed. Too right, replied Greypaw with feeling. I know I wouldn't want to get into a fight with him. Not so fast, Tigerclaw. Spotted Leaf placed her paw over Tigerclaw's sharp talon and gently moved it away. This apprentice needs to keep as still as possible until the cut has healed. We don't want him opening his wound by jumping about trying to please you. Leave him alone. Firepaw found himself holding his breath as he waited for Tigerclaw's reaction. He guessed that few cats dared to give orders to the warriors like that. The tabby stiffened and seemed about to speak when Spotted Leaf mewed teasingly. Even you know better than to argue with a medicine cat, Tigerclaw. Tigerclaw's eyes flashed a little at the little tortoiseshell's words. I wouldn't dare argue with you, dear Spotted Leaf, he purred. He turned to leave and caught sight of Greypaw and Firepaw. Who's this? He asked Greypaw, towering above them. He's the new apprentice, Greypaw meowed. He smells like a kitty pet, snorted the warrior. I was a house cat. Firepaw meowed boldly. but I am going to train to be a warrior. Tiger Claw looked at him with sudden interest. Yes, now I remember. Bluestar mentioned that she had stumbled across some stray kitty pet. So she's actually going to try you out, is she? Firepaw sat up very straight, anxious to impress this distinguished clan warrior. That's right, he mewed respectfully. Tiger Claw eyed him thoughtfully. Then I shall watch your progress with interest. Firepaw puffed his chest out proudly as Tiger Claw stalked away. Do you think he liked me? I don't think Tiger Claw likes any apprentices, whispered Greypaw. Just then Ravenpaw stirred and twitched his ears. Has he gone? He mumbled. Who? Tiger Claw? Replied Greypaw, trotting towards him. Yep, he's gone. Hi there. Firepaw began about to introduce himself. Go away, both of you, Spotted Leaf protested. How am I meant to help this cat with all these interruptions? She impatiently flicked her tail at Greypaw and Firepaw and pushed her way between them and her patient. Firepaw realized she was serious despite the lively glimmer in her warm amber eyes. Come on then, Firepaw, mewed Greypaw. I'll show you around. See you later, Ravenpaw. The two cats left Spotted Leaf with Ravenpaw and walked across the clearing. Greypaw looked thoughtful. He was clearly taking his duties as a guide very seriously. You know the high rock already, he began, flicking his tail toward the big, smooth rock Bluestar always addressed. Bluestar always addresses the clan from there. Her den is down there. He lifted his nose towards a hollow in the side of the high rock. Her den was carved out many moons ago by an ancient stream. Hanging lichen draped the entrance, sheltering the leader's nest from wind and rain. The warriors sleep over here, Greypaw went on. Firepaw followed into a large bush a few paces away from the high rock. There was a clear view from here right down to the gorse entrance into the camp. The branches of the bush hung low, but Firepaw could see a sheltered space inside where the warriors made their nests. The senior warriors sleep nearest the center, where it's warmest, explained Greypaw. They usually share their fresh kill together over by the clump of nettles. The younger warriors eat nearby. Sometimes they are invited to join the senior warriors for eating, which is a big honor. What about the other clan cats? Firepaw asked, fascinated by feeling rather overwhelmed by all the traditions and rituals of clan life. Well, the queens share warrior quarters when they work as warriors, but when they are expecting kits or nursing them, they stay in a nest near the nursery. The elders have their own place on the other side of the clearing. Come on, I'll show you. Firepaw trotted after Greypaw across the clearing and past the shadowy corner where Spotted Leaf and her den. They stopped beside a fallen tree that sheltered a patch of lush grass. Crouched amongst the soft greenery were 4 elderly cats tucking into a plump young rabbit. Dustpaw and Sandpaw would have brought them that, whispered Greypaw. One of the apprentices' duties is catching fresh kill for the elders. Hello, youngster, one of the elders greeted Greypaw. Hello, small ear, mewed Greypaw, nodding respectfully. This must be our new apprentice, Firepaw, isn't it? Meowed the second Tom. His patchy fur was dark brown, and there were only a stump where his tail should have been. That's right, Firepaw replied, copying Greypaw's polite nod. I'm Half-Tail, purred the brown Tom. Welcome to the clan. Have you two eaten? Meowed Small Ear. Firepaw and Greypaw both shook their heads. Well, there's enough here. Dustpaw and Sandpaw are turning to fine hunters. Would you mind if these youngsters share a mouse? One Eye. The pale gray queen who laid beside him shook her head. Firepaw noticed one of her eyes was clouded and sightless. What about you, Dappletail? The other elder, a tortoiseshell she-cat with a gray muzzle, meowed in a voice cracked with age. Of course not. Thank you, mewed Greypaw eagerly. He stepped forward and took a large mouse from the pile of prey and dropped it at Firepaw's feet. You still not tasted mouse? He asked. No, Firepaw admitted. He suddenly felt excited by the warm smells that were rising from the piece of fresh kill. His whole body quivered at the thought of sharing his first real food as a clan member. In that case, you can have first bite. Just save me some. Greypaw dipped his head and stood back to give Firepaw room. Firepaw crouched down and took a large bite from the mouse. It was juicy and tender and sang with the flavors of the forest. What do you think? Asked Greypaw. Fantastic, mumbled Firepaw, his mouth still full. Move over then, mewed Greypaw, stepping forward and bending his head to take a bite. As the two apprentices shared the mouse, they listened to the elders talk amongst themselves. How long before Bluestar appoints a new deputy? Asked Small Ear. What did you say, Small Ear? Mewed One Eye. I think your hearing has become as poor as your eyesight, snapped Small Ear impatiently. I said, how long before Bluestar appoints a new deputy? One Eye ignored Small Ear's irritated reply and spoke instead to the Tortoiseshell Queen. Dappletail, do you remember the day many moons ago when Bluestar herself was appointed deputy? Dappletail mewed earnestly. Oh yes, it was not long after she lost her kits. She'll not be happy to appointing a new deputy, Small Ear reserved. Redtail served her long and well, but she'll need to make up her mind quickly. According to Clan Cuspidon, the choice has to be made before moon high after the death of the old deputy. At least this time the choice is obvious, meowed Halftail. Firepaw raised his head and looked around the clearing. Who could Halftail mean? To Firepaw, all the warriors looked worthy of becoming deputy. Perhaps he meant Tigerclaw? After all, he had avenged Redtail's death. Tigerclaw was sitting not far off, his ears angled towards the elders' conversation. As Firepaw stretched with his tongue to lick the last traces of mouse from his whiskers, Bluestar's voice called from High Rock. Redtail's body still lay in the clearing below, pale gray in the fading light. A new deputy must be appointed, she mewed, but first let us give thanks to StarClan for the life of Redtail. Tonight he sits with his fellow warriors amongst the stars. Silence fell as all the cats looked up into the sky, which was beginning to darken, and as evening crept over the forest. And now I shall name ThunderClan's new deputy, Bluestar continued. I say these words before the body of Redtail so that his spirit may hear and approve my choice. Firepaw looked at Tigerclaw. He couldn't help noticing the hunger in the big warrior's amber eyes as he stared up at the high rock. Lionheart, meowed Bluestar, will be the new deputy of ThunderClan. Firepaw was curious to see Tigerclaw's reaction, but the dark warrior's face revealed nothing as he moved to congratulate Lionheart with a nudge so hearty that it almost pushed the golden tabby off balance. Why didn't you make Tigerclaw deputy? Firepaw whispered to Greypaw. Probably because Lionheart has been a warrior longer, so he has a lot more experience. Greypaw murmured back, still looking up at Bluestar. Bluestar spoke again. Redtail was also mentor to young Dustpaw. Since there must be no delay in the training of our apprentices, I shall appoint Dustpaw's new mentor immediately. Darkstripe, you are ready for your first apprentice, so you will continue Dustpaw's training. You had a fine mentor in Tigerclaw, and I expect you to pass on some of the excellent skills you were taught. The tabby warrior swelled with pride as he showed his acceptance with a solemn nod. He strode over to Dustpaw, bent his head, and rather awkwardly touched noses with his new apprentice. Dustpaw flicked his tail respectfully, but his eyes were still dull with grief for his lost mentor. Bluestar raised her voice. I shall keep vigil with Redtail's body tonight, before we bury him at sunrise. She jumped down from the high rock and walked over to lie beside Redtail's body once more. Many of the other cats joined her, Dustpaw and Small Ear among them. Should we sit with them too? Firepaw suggested. He had to admit the idea didn't appeal to him much. It had been a busy day and he was beginning to feel tired. All he wanted to do was find somewhere warm and dry to curl up and sleep. Greypaw shook his head. No, only those who were closest to Redtail will share his final night. I'll show you where we sleep. The apprentice's den is over here. Firepaw followed Greypaw to a thick bush of ferns that lay behind a mossy tree stump. All the apprentices share their fresh kill by the stump, Greypaw told him. How many apprentices are there? Firepaw asked. Not as many as usual, just me, you, Ravenpaw, Dustpaw, and Sandpaw. As Greypaw and Firepaw settled themselves beside this tree stump, a young she-cat crawled out from beneath the ferns. Her coat was ginger, like Firepaw's, but much paler, with barely visible stripes, darker fur. So here comes the new apprentice, she meowed, narrowing her eyes. Hello, Firepaw mewed. The young cat sniffed rudely. He smells like a kitty pet. Don't tell me I'm going to have to share my nest with that revolting stench. Firepaw felt rather taken aback. Since his fight with Longtail, all the cats had been quite friendly. Maybe they had just been distracted by Ravenpaw's news, he thought. You'll have to excuse Sandpaw, apologized Greypaw. I think she must have a fur ball stuck somewhere. She's not usually this bad-tempered. Spat Sandpaw crossly. Hold on, youngsters. The deep voice of White Storm sounded behind the apprentices. Sandpaw, as my apprentice, I expect you to be a little more welcoming to this newcomer. Sandpaw held up her head and looked defiant. I'm sorry, White Storm, she purred, not sounding sorry at all. I just didn't expect to be training with a kitty pet, that's all. I'm sure you'll get used to it, Sandpaw, meowed White Storm calmly. Now, it's getting late and training starts early tomorrow. You three should get some sleep. He gave Sandpaw a stern look, and she nodded obediently. As he walked off, she spun around and vanished into the clump of ferns, sniffing once more as she brushed past Firepaw. With a flick of his tail, Greypaw invited Firepaw to follow him, and led the way after Sandpaw. Inside the sleeping area, the ground was lined with soft moss, and the pale moonlight turned everything a delicate shade of green. The air was fragrant with fern scent and warmer than outside. Where do I sleep? Firepaw asked. Anywhere, just so long as it's not near me, snarled Sandpaw, who was prodding some moss with her paw. Greypaw and Firepaw exchanged glances, but said nothing. Firepaw raked together a pile of moss with his claws. When he had gathered his bed into a cozy nest, he circled it until he was comfortable and settled down. His whole body felt drowsy with contentment. This was his home now. He was a member of ThunderClan. And I believe that is where we will end for tonight. 2 very long chapters, but a hefty amount of pages. So, thank you for joining me, and have a good night.